Hey everybody, and welcome back to episode 39 of the Sunset Single Player Podcast. It's your host Michael, and we're going up on YouTube again today. And we have a lot of news to cover today, mostly related to Returnal, the upcoming PlayStation 5 exclusive from the Finnish studio Housemarque. We'll definitely be going into that today. The new controllers for PSVR 2. And then at the end of the episode, I'll be going into more of my impressions on the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I have made some more progress in recently. But starting out, number one for the news this week is that Returnal, like I said, did just get a brand new story trailer and a dedicated new PlayStation blog post as well regarding its story. So as a lot of you out there probably know, Returnal is the upcoming action third-person shooter and roguelike game coming to PS5 on April 30th. And it did just get a major new story update. So up until this point in time, we haven't known too much about what the game will be about. We knew what the gameplay would be, but Returnal is looking to be more AAA in terms of the budget that went into it. They do have Sony's support through the second-party relationship, so Sony is funding this game for PlayStation 5. And this time, the Finnish studio Housemarque actually hired the narrative director. So his name is Greg Loudon, and Loudon explained in more detail what the game is going to be about over on the PlayStation blog. So before we go into that, I just want to briefly mention what we've kind of seen so far for this game. So far, from a Returnal standpoint, we've mostly just seen gameplay-focused trailers with just a big focus and emphasis on the fast-paced third-person shooting combat on the alien planet that's called Atropos. However, the story trailer that just came out also showed some of the more unexpected story parts of the game. So we do know that there's a house that kind of brings Celine back to prior memories. We'll get into that a little bit later. But the story trailer also, from a gameplay perspective, did show a few minutes of gameplay, and they even showed some aliens that kind of resembled the machines to me from Horizon Zero Dawn. One of them even looked kind of like the saber-tooth or the tiger looking one. I forget the name of the machine, but it was really cool to see that kind of comparison between Returnal and then Horizon, which is a game I really enjoy as well. So Atropos, the planet itself, is very dark, but it does burst into light from the just very intense shooting gameplay and the environmental weapons that the main protagonist, whose name is Celine, can bring with her to outer space. And as we know, the roguelike elements kind of come in because every time you die, you get slightly different weapon loadouts and abilities, and then the environments change as well as the enemy design and placements depending on where you are on Atropos. So that kind of varies up the gameplay in the game. To me though, based off what we've seen so far, from a gameplay point of view, it does seem like after getting through certain sections, the game's going to turn into more of a linear action and third-person shooting type of experience. We did see in a past trailer that there were story objectives kind of marked that you could progress in a linear fashion towards. So before we get into the story details, I do want to say that the gunplay looks really fast and kinetic. It even reminds me a little bit of Control. So while the enemy designs kind of reminded me of the alien versions of machines from Horizon, I think the third-person shooting looks a lot like Control. And Celine even has like a double dash similar to what Jesse Faden had in Control as well. So I do definitely draw a comparison between those two games. And Housemarque did state that it is going to be a challenging game. So maybe not something as hard as like Demon's Souls or Bloodborne or something like that. But Housemarque did say that in order to survive, players will have to really think on their feet and rely on skill and fast thinking to get through the game. One point of controversy is that the game is going to cost $70, and a lot of people don't think, based off of what we've seen so far, it justifies that price. Me, however, though, I do think that the production value is definitely there, and now that we're getting more of a narrative focus in addition to complement the really fun gameplay, I do think that this is looking more and more like a $70 game and a next-gen PlayStation 5 game that I really can't wait to play and give you guys my opinions on later at the end of April. So now that we went over the gameplay a little bit, I do want to go into the story details that we just learned this past week. So Greg Loudon, who, like I mentioned, is the narrative director of Housemarque, refers to the game as a dark action sci-fi thriller in terms of its storytelling. So it's not an arcade-style game like what they've had in the past. It's going to have a much bigger focus on story, and it sounds like it's going to be a very thrilling, action-focused, and cinematic type of experience, which I do think goes along well with a lot of Sony's more recent offerings. So since storytelling is new to Housemarque, they said that they went into it with the goal of telling a mysterious, layered, and haunting story that's something that you'll discover, consider, and even replay more and more of to discover more story tidbits the more and more times you play the game. So the main goal of the game is to give just a really dark cinematic experience to complement the very fast-paced and addicting gameplay loop that Housemarque is known for with its past titles. So in Returnal, the playable character, like I mentioned, his name is Celine, and Celine is a female Greek-American deep space scout. And this type of character is really going to appeal to space junkies, I think. I think she's seems to be very serious and driven, and they do in the article actually say that she's driven, intelligent, and resourceful as well. And the resourcefulness actually comes into play later based on items that you can keep in subsequent runs of the game that kind of contributes to the roguelike elements of the game and making progress, which is great. The main premise of Returnal is that Celine actually goes against her Deep Space Scout leader's orders, and she decides to travel to the alien planet called Atropos so that she can track the source of the White Shadow broadcast signal that's very mysterious and is something that these Deep Space Scouts don't really know a lot about. So it turns out that Celine crash lands on Atropos in an alien forest and must fight her way through alien forces to discover and research statues, gates, alien corpses, and also something called xenotech as well, which helps to advance the story and helps Celine figure out what's actually going on this mysterious planet and the mystery surrounding the White Shadow broadcast signal. And Celine's suit is great because it does come in two striking versions of black and yellow and then also white, and the black and yellow one definitely appeals to me as a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan. It looks just straight up like a Steelers suit, and they basically want you to stick out in this suit and serve as kind of a very stark point of contrast between yourself and the very dark planet of Atropos. So it does kind of serve a contrasting kind of balanced point of view in that case. So we learn that Celine will die on her first venture to Atropos, and then on each rebirth, Celine will crash land again, and the gameplay will restart with new xenotech mysteries to find and enemies in different locations and different layouts, like I mentioned earlier. We also learned that Atropos is split up into different sections and environments, each with different traps and hazards for Celine to run into and hinder her gameplay experience as she's trying to track down the source of the White Shadow broadcast signal. So we learned that Celine can progress the main story by holding on to various key items across different runs and rebirths, they're called. So upon death, it's called a rebirth when you re-crash land on the planet. So we learned that Xeno archives are planetary statues and are only visual cues, and then xenoglyphs are writings that help to advance the story and tell the story and the history behind the planet of Atropos. And it's interesting because it sounds like there's also going to be kind of a Bloodborne type of multiplayer element where other versions of Celine can leave behind what's called scout logs to help give tips or advance the stories. So I think that that's cool that they're getting kind of a multiplayer spin on it, while not necessarily being multiplayer. It's kind of just something, like I said, that From Software has kind of gotten famous for in their games. And then finally, we also learned that there's story first-person segments where Celine has to go into a familiar house to discover certain secrets inside that must be pieced together to help advance the story further. And to me, these kind of house-type sections remind me a little bit of Resident Evil 7, just the eeriness of the house. I'm sure the gameplay won't be super similar, but they did say they're going for a sci-fi kind of horror thriller type of vibe, so maybe we'll get puzzles in these types of house sections. At least that's what I would imagine. I bet that there's kind of some first-person puzzle solving in these types of sections. That's what I would hope for, at least. I think that would be a really cool way to kind of break up the more action-heavy third-person shooting gameplay. I think that that could be a cool way to help advance the story. So my overall thoughts on Returnal, and then we'll get into other topics this week. I do think that it's looking to be a very dark and bold story coming out of Housemarque, and I do have faith in them, even though this is their first narrative-driven game to really succeed in its story. I'm definitely intrigued by the Greek-American astronaut and Celine. She seems very serious and intent on finding the secrets behind this planet. I think it's great that we're getting an action third-person shooting roguelike game in space. That's something that hasn't been done a lot before. It looks very unique. While being unique, it also seems to combine a lot of familiar elements from games we know and love. Like, I know I saw a YouTube comment on the trailer, the most recent story trailer, where someone said that Returnal kind of looks like an adult version of Ratchet and Clank, which I kind of agree with. And I love Ratchet and Clank, so that's great because it seems like the way the enemies kind of frantically move around and you have to switch between weapons makes people think of Ratchet. So that's definitely a very high compliment that this game could be paid even before it's already out. So Returnal's looking really good. I'm definitely excited to cover it starting in late April. It's looking like a unique game with some really solid gameplay. And I do have to admit, the most recent story trailer, the snippets of gameplay, while Atropos looks really beautiful and unique as an environment, and the colors really look amazing in the game from the weapons that you shoot, and the environmental weapons especially that can launch like electricity and things like that. I do think that the game is looking to be a little bit choppy. At least it didn't really seem to run super smoothly in the trailer, but I don't want you guys to be worried about that, and I'm not worried about it either, because I do think that the footage that was shown could have been much earlier in development. I'm confident in Housemarque to put together a really solid new game for the PlayStation 5. PS5 is definitely needing a AAA type of experience this spring before Ratchet hits, and I think Returnal is going to hit at the perfect time. I think it's smart that they delayed the game and gave it about 6 extra weeks so that they could polish it up and hopefully deliver what is going to be a really, really solid experience. All right, so number 2 for the news this week is that there are new updates on the next-gen iteration of PlayStation VR's controllers. So Hideaki Nishino, who is the Senior Vice President over at Sony's Platforming, Planning, and Management team, he took to the PlayStation blog to formally reveal the controllers for the next iteration of PSVR. Like I said, that we still do not have a name yet at this point in time, so we don't know if they're going to call it PSVR 2 or what they're going to call this new next-gen version of VR, but I have to say I'm really impressed by the controllers, and they did go into some notable details that I'll report on for you guys. So they basically said that the new main goal in designing this new controller was to focus in on how to make the player feel most immersed and offer a greater sense of feeling even down to each of your fingers by using some of the same ideologies and mindsets they had in mind when designing the PS5 DualSense controller as well. So the design of the controller pretty much takes on what Sony describes as an orb shape. So you kind of have like 2 orbs, one in each hand, that are kind of like, they kind of look like perfect push-ups if you guys have ever seen those. And they look comfortable though. They look definitely futuristic. They're black and sleek. They're not like bulky or anything. The buttons look really clean. And we learned that the orb focus had a really big focus on ergonomics, which allows the player to feel the greatest sense of precision and immersiveness in its movement. So we did learn that the Sony engineering and design team worked together to build the new controller from the ground up. Prototypes of the new VR controller are soon going to be sent out to VR developers, which is good. However, this does make me think that we won't be seeing the PSVR 2 or whatever they do name it until late 2022 or 2023, considering developers don't even have their hands on the controller yet, and it seems to be very integral to the games themselves, the new controllers. So I imagine that the launch of the PSVR 2 is a while away. But I'm happy to say that I can't wait to get this. I'm definitely going to be patient and hold off. I'm not going to buy like the first PSVR until this one's ready. I'm just going to buy the new one. However, I do really want to play Astrobot Rescue Mission after playing and loving Astro's Playroom, so it's going to be hard to be patient, but it'll definitely be there waiting for me as soon as I get the new VR in a couple years probably. I really dig the design and the orb-based controllers. It looks modern, and they did a great thing by replacing the PlayStation Move controllers. That's very antiquated tech. It's like over 10 years old, so they definitely needed a new next-gen VR type of controller. I really like what they're doing here, and it sounds like the 5 key features according to the article in the controller are going to be haptic feedback, adaptive triggers, so that's like the PS5 controller, and then there's going to be finger touch detection, tracking, and action buttons and analog sticks as well. So we'll have that to look forward to once we get more information on the next iteration of PlayStation VR. Number 3 is that Haven Studio was announced as a new second-party studio to Sony. So as announced on the PlayStation blog, Sony has a new second-party studio called Haven, being led by Jade Raymond, who is most well known for her work on the older Assassin's Creed franchises in the past. I believe she served as an executive producer on some of those Ubisoft games, maybe even some Watch Dogs games as well. And we learned that Haven will be based in Montreal and will seemingly develop an exclusive game for PS5 only in a second-party relationship to Sony, which is exciting. And we don't have a lot of details. Actually, we don't have any details on what the game is yet. I hope it's not an open-world action RPG like the Assassin's Creed games are. I definitely want them to do something unique and something that PlayStation doesn't have a lot of. I think it would be cool if they did like a first-person shooter, since it does seem like Sony is kind of lacking in that department lately, but we'll just have to wait and see what Haven is, and we'll be keeping our eye on that in the future. So number 4 for the news this week is that there was a major update on Dying Light 2. So Dying Light 2, of course, is the game coming from the Polish developer Techland, and it did receive a small update after a long period of silence and confusion on whether the game was actually making any progress. So we did get a short video from Techland, who kind of made fun of some of their fans, their angry fans on Twitter who were cursing them out and saying like, where the heck is this update? Essentially, I thought it was cool that they kind of poked fun at those people and themselves and said that it is a really complex project at the end of the day. That's basically what their message in the video was, that they announced the game too early. The game is complex and it's going to take a lot of time to perfect. So they needed more time, and they said it was a mistake to announce it when they did. They should have been more tight-lipped about it. And they said that the game isn't in development hell because it actually keeps progressing in a very positive way, which is great to hear. And they even did offer a short gameplay clip that looked really solid to me. And the first-person combat focus is looking fun as well. I never played the first Dying Light. I've heard really good things, and the new one looks like a lot of fun. It's going to be a game that's going to keep players busy and engaged for months on end, they said. So it sounds like it's going to be a longer game, probably a lot of side content, and have maybe even some replayability as well, which is exciting. And they announced that a more formal update on Dying Light 2 will be coming soon through probably another video or post or something like that. But the gameplay they did show in this minor update was definitely looking good. The game has seemed to make some very positive progress, at least in my eyes. All right, number 5 is that there were 6 new indie games announced coming for PlayStation consoles this year. And as consolidated by IGN.com, they actually had a really good article where they broke down what each of these games is about, so I'll be referencing that here. The first game is Operation Tango, which is described as an asymmetric co-op puzzle game coming to PS4 and PS5 this spring. And in this game, a spy has to infiltrate certain locations while the second player is a hacker that allows them to bypass certain locations and help them hack their way in to complete the puzzles. And the second game is called Chicory, A Colorful Tale, and this game is set up where a dog has to use a magical paintbrush to solve puzzles, and this one's coming to PS4 and PS5 this spring as well. The third game, and this is one they actually announced in the very first state of play, I think, announcing the PS5, is called Nor Play With Your Food, and this game comes to PS5 only this summer. And in this game, it sounds like what the name is. You play with the food, and the music and images change depending on how you play with it. Looks pretty weird to me. I'm not really sure what the point of it is, but I'm sure it will find its foodie audience and some people will enjoy it. Where the Heart Leads is the fourth game. This is coming to PS4 and PS5 on July 13th. And in this game, a man's dog disappears down a sinkhole and he has to go to find it. And it kind of focuses in on a narrative-heavy experience that kind of sounds like a trip through this guy's life. It kind of sounds to me like the game Arise, A Simple Story, which is a game I liked that I played. I think it came out in like late 2019. It's from Piccolo Games. It's very narrative-based puzzle platformer. Kind of sounds like that. And then finally, Puzzling Places is a PSVR game coming, focused on solving life-size jigsaw puzzles, and coming in the winter of this year. And then the final game is Heavenly Bodies, which comes out later this year for PS4 and PS5. And this is an astronaut-based puzzle game that can be played either in single player or in co-op. So out of all these indie games coming to PlayStation, I would recommend checking out Operation Tango and Heavenly Bodies the most if you're interested in puzzle-based indie games. All right, number 6 is that Scarlet Nexus and Disco Elysium have gotten release dates for consoles. We also learned that the Assassin's Creed Valhalla first DLC pack has gotten a release date as well. So Disco Elysium, which is the detective-based role-playing game from studio ZAUM out of Estonia, has announced that Disco Elysium, the Final Cut Edition, is coming out on March 30th for PS4 and PS5. And then Scarlet Nexus is, of course, the Bandai Namco game that's coming on June 25th. I don't think I'll be playing either of these games. Neither of them really seems to appeal to me that much, and although I am starting to like RPGs more, like I'm really enjoying Final Fantasy VII Remake, which we'll get to momentarily, these games just don't really seem to do it for me. And in terms of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, we learned that the first DLC pack, called The Wrath of the Druids, will take place in Ireland and will come on April 29th. And while I did beat and enjoy Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I don't think I'll be getting to this DLC pack, at least anytime soon. I'd rather play the next DLC pack that we're going to talk about, which is number 7 of the news this week, which is that The Ancient Gods Part 2 is now out on PS4 and PS5 and other consoles as well. And there's a really good interview by GameInformer.com I'm going to reference here. You guys should go check it out and read it if you're interested. They had a really good article with id Software's Hugo Martin about Doom Eternal and its new DLC pack, which is now available, called The Ancient Gods Part 2. And the highlights of the article basically include the fact that id was actually very productive working from home during the pandemic, during COVID, and they were actually able to complete about 90% of both of their DLC packs, so Ancient Gods Part 1 and Ancient Gods Part 2, entirely from home. And they say that some sections in Ancient Gods Part 2 are among the most impressive things that they've created yet. So the main takeaways are that Hugo Martin, who is the main creative director, I believe, at id Software, explained that Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, and the Ancient Gods Part 1 and Part 2 make up a trilogy. So the Ancient Gods arc makes up the third and final game of the trilogy, but they said it won't be all moving forward for Doomslayer. It's only concluding this specific story arc for the Doomslayer. We also learned that executive producer Marty Stratton said that the scale and scope of the last level in the Ancient Gods Part 2 is unlike anything they've ever done before as a studio. So the game is already running at 60 FPS, which is great, but they did state that true next-gen versions will be coming and are on the way after Ancient Gods Part 2, and these next-gen versions will add ray tracing as well. So I think I'm going to wait to play the DLC until the next-gen version comes. It's great that it already runs at 60 frames, but I do think that waiting for that ray tracing will be worth it. I really love Doom Eternal, like I've mentioned in the past, and I'm excited to play Ancient Gods Part 1 and Part 2 back to back, and I'm really excited to see how the story arc is concluded in this one. All right, so 2 more news items, then we'll get into my extended thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Remake, or at least my updated thoughts on it. So number 8 is that Forsaken was announced for a 2022 release date. So Forsaken was previously known as Project Athia and will be an RPG by Square Enix and Luminous Productions coming in 2022. So we learned that the main character's name is Frey, and she has to survive in a magical world called Athia. There's sights of a dragon in the trailer. We don't know too much else yet, but the game will be an action RPG with a great emphasis on movement in an open world. The game graphically looks very beautiful. Some cuts of it even reminded me of like the scenery in Ghost of Tsushima. It looked to bear resemblance to that, at least in my opinion. There was a really cool screenshot released in the PlayStation blog article of Frey going up against a bear, so I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on this one. Graphically, it looks very, very nice. The final item of news this week, so number 9, is that the Play at Home initiative for Sony's consoles has gotten a bunch of new games coming soon. So starting on March 25th, Sony is now extending its next round of free games in its Play and Stay at Home initiative. So after recently giving away Ratchet & Clank, a highly recommended game by me, by the way, we now learn that there's 10 new games coming for free that you can add to your library and download at any time after March 25th for a limited period of time and then keep them forever. And the games do include a nice mix of both PS4 games and PlayStation VR games for anyone that's interested. So the games are Abzu by Giant Squid, and that's kind of an underwater exploration game that I played. It was pretty good. It's the same developer as The Pathless, which is the PS5 launch game that I also recommend. That one's also on PS4 as well. The second game is The Witness, which is the puzzle-based game, and then Subnautica, Res Infinite, and Enter the Gungeon are the other PS4 games. And then the PlayStation VR games that will be free starting on March 25th are Astrobot Rescue Mission, Moss, Paper Beasts, and Thumper. And then we finally learn in the PlayStation blog article that the final game being added on April 19th is going to be the excellent game that I really loved called Horizon Zero Dawn. And it is going to be the complete edition, so it's going to come along with the Frozen Wilds DLC as well. And I want to say that for any of you guys that haven't played that, definitely don't sleep on it. I thought the Frozen Wilds was a great continuation of Aloy's story after the events of the original game. This is really kind of Sony to do. They obviously don't want people going out and about, so they're giving away some free games again, some really solid free games too. This makes me want a PSVR. I really want to play Astrobot Rescue Mission and Moss, but while it's also kind and giving of them, there's also a business side of it. It does make sense because they want people to play Ratchet & Clank and Horizon Zero Dawn for free so that once the new versions coming up, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and then of course Horizon Forbidden West are ready to go later this year, players will kind of see the special sauce and the magic in the original games and fork over the money for the next versions of them. So I do think this is a smart strategic business decision by Sony that will further improve the sales of the sequels, and hopefully Horizon Forbidden West still hits its 2021 release date. The fact that they're giving away Zero Dawn in April makes me think that hopefully this is going to come out in like the fall or something, maybe give new players the chance to play through Aloy's first story in the spring, and then by the time fall comes around, they'll be ready for the sequel. It might get pushed into 2022, but I do think that Forbidden West is going to hit this year. If I had to guess an exact release date, or a month at least. I'd probably say this one's coming in September. All right, so that's it for the news this week. I do just want to, for a few minutes, go over my additional time with Final Fantasy VII Remake. As of last week, I think I was on like chapter 3, and I've played it a lot over the last week. Now I'm on chapter 14 out of 18, so I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through the game, at least from a time standpoint, maybe coming up on 3/4 of the way through the game. I'm really enjoying myself. The game has just really fun combat that is really the driving force for me. I mean, the story is cool, the characters are interesting, but the combat and the gameplay and the kind of turn-based element to it really speaks to me. And I do think the game has some really challenging sections, so especially some of these boss fights. Like the boss fight to end chapter 9 took me a few tries. It was really difficult until I realized that I had to use different magic powers depending on certain phases of the boss fight. I don't want to spoil what it is, but the chapter 9 boss fight takes place in an arena, and it's something like I have never seen. Really interesting. Really weird fight I haven't seen in a while that only Square Enix could probably come up with something like that. And not all sections of the game are really tough. It really just is certain bosses. The chapter 12 boss especially was challenging as well. You really do have to make sure that certain members in your party have healing materia to help cure your HP and help heal you guys up. And then you also want to have plenty of ethers so that you can replenish your magical power, so that you can use fire, electric, and ice attacks. You definitely want to use magic in addition to the more melee-focused gameplay. Tifa especially she's like a brawler. I love playing as Tifa. She has one of her abilities is called Unbridled Strength that gives her kind of an extra edge in battle that's really fun. And then Cloud, of course, has some great overhead sword slashes with Braver, and I have fire materia on my version of Cloud, so really strong fire attacks. I think I have one of them, it takes like 21 MP, so it takes like half my magic bar, but it's really effective against enemies that are weak to fire, especially these like turtles with spears called like Sahagins or something. The enemy design in the game is just really unique and weird. I'm not used to playing Japanese role-playing games like this very often, but the team that designed these enemies and these enemy animations, very talented and unique. There's a lot of weird-looking enemies that Shinra has created to take down in this one. And I also learned kind of the hard way that you always want to be stocked up on Phoenix Downs as well to help revive your party members. Some of the fights, especially in the later chapters, you're going to get overwhelmed and you'll forget to heal in time, or you won't have the ATB, kind of that replenished meter, so that you are able to heal. So some of your enemies can go down, and you definitely want to have the Phoenix Downs to help revive them and bring them back up. And then slowly, when you have the chance, after getting some hits in, just heal everyone in your party over time to make things easier. And like I mentioned, magic is really key to exploiting enemy weaknesses, and I really struggled with the game until I got the hang of the magic aspect to it. And the special abilities that each character has are really great for staggering. So like I said, Tifa's version of Unbridled Strength does a lot of damage and brings up the pressure meter so you can stagger enemies and do even more damage, which is really important as well. The soundtrack in the game is still incredible. It's only gotten better throughout my playthrough, and I've been blasting it pretty loudly through my soundbar, which is great. And the game would definitely be improved by 60 frames per second once the update is ready for the PS5, but the game is still very good looking at 30 frames now on my PS5, and the graphics are great. I really like some of the lighting tricks. I will say though, some of the environmental sections are just really outdated and not up to par with the other more high production value aspects of the game. I'm not really sure why they didn't take the time to make some of the environments look better. Maybe they just ran out of time before the game was going to come out. They decided it wasn't worth it to put the extra time and effort in and delay the game again. That would be my guess. So that's a little bit weird and jarring, but gameplay wise, soundtrack wise, the game's great. I love that you're able to switch back and forth between members in the Avalanche party. It's very smooth and very beneficial to switch back and forth to take advantage of different magical attacks, healing abilities, and standard abilities as well. I just defeated one boss called Eligor in chapter 10, and I thought it was one of the coolest mid-game bosses I've ever seen. So quick spoiler alert, just skip ahead like 15 seconds if you don't want to hear about Eligor. But Eligor is basically a ghost that rides on the back of a horse and chariot, and the horse has red eyes and lasers that he launches at you. Really hard fight, but amazing music was playing overhead. Just a really unique boss design. Horse and chariot, just really cool. I loved it. So some moments in this game are excellent. Some of the boss fights are so unique and among some of the greatest fights I've experienced in a long while. But I have to say that the pacing of the game is a little bit rough at times. I think certain chapters are very dramatic and drawn out, and that might be something I'm just not used to because I didn't play a lot of JRPGs in the past. It's a genre I'm not very well familiar with. There were some puzzles that were simple enough, but kind of hindered the pacing of the game in a negative way. They were just a little bit repetitive, and I could have gone without some of them. One of the puzzles kind of includes a crane where you have to pick up a certain character and transport her across the area that I thought was just not really necessary and didn't add to the experience in a very positive way. There's also just a decent amount of time where you're just kind of running back and forth between objectives without pausing much in between that I think they could have just eliminated entirely. It'll probably take me over 30 hours to beat the game. If I had to guess, probably about 35. I'll probably wrap it up within the next week or two. So it is a longer game. I think they could have trimmed the fat a little bit, maybe like 5 or 10 hours off the top of just kind of the more mundane, less action-packed sequences to make just a more tighter and successful experience. And hopefully it's something they take to heart in development of the second game, but I do think that they're very proud of what they have, so they do want to draw it out and they do want to make it longer. So that's their prerogative. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that I don't really jive with personally. I also really like playing as Barrett, but I don't like his character. I think he's very brash, like I mentioned last week. He's just not a very interesting protagonist. He kind of repeats like the same lines over and over again. Whereas Cloud is definitely growing on me. So at the beginning of the game, I wasn't crazy about Cloud. He was really just in it for the money, being a mercenary, trying to work for Avalanche to get paid. But I'm really starting to like him as a character. I can definitely see him bonding with the main characters in the game. He has more conviction behind his decisions to assault the Shinra reactors and go after Shinra. And I don't want to give away too much in the story, but he's definitely grown in a positive way as a character, and I'm really excited to see how it wraps up over the next week or so as I play the last few chapters of the game. And you definitely have to make sure you're stocked up as well. You really need to buy a lot of potions and ethers and Phoenix Downs, so the revives from the vending machines. Otherwise, you'll be screwed in the harder sections. And like I mentioned, you really just want to play to each enemy's weakness. So I love using the fire materia as Cloud against enemies that are weak to it. Dogs especially take a lot of damage from fire, and then Barrett with his electrical kind of ranged attacks. At least I'm using electrical materia, thunder materia for him. It's great against like turrets and more ranged enemies, so I recommend using thunder materia with Barrett. And then Tifa, I usually use ice materia. She has a really nice blizzard attack that goes really well with her more brawling type of gameplay. So yeah, I'm really excited to wrap this game up. I'm sure I'll have more to say about it once I complete it. I'm glad I played it. It was a really strong offering for PlayStation Plus this month. I'm excited to see maybe in the comments if any of you guys have played Final Fantasy VII Remake, what you think about it. Let me know what you think, and if you're excited for the next part. Leave any thoughts on Returnal. Are you excited for the game? Are you looking forward to it? Do you think it's gonna flop? Maybe you don't think it's worth $70. Just let me know below what you think. And remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. And also remember the podcast is available on Apple and iTunes, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify, pretty much all the major podcast hosting services if you'd rather listen to it in the audio format. But I'm really enjoying doing it in the video form on YouTube. I think it's hopefully going to help over time find a new audience that's interested in all these games and talking about all this stuff. So hope you guys today found the episode informative, and have a great rest of your week, and looking forward to talking with you next for episode 40 of the Sunset single player. And remember that I do have some videos coming up soon. I'm working on a BioShock in 2021 review, so expect that up on the channel soon. And then we'll cruise right into new videos once all these new releases come out, like Oddworld Soulstorm, Blue Fire, and Ratchet & Clank, Returnal. We're definitely looking forward to covering all these games for you guys. But until next time, thanks for stopping by, and take care.